going to talk today about fluency. Fluency in theory and in practice. You know, we always say, that's okay in theory, but what about the practice? Academics say, that's okay in practice, but what about the theory? So we'll do both. We'll have a look at the theory and the practice. Well, one thing that interests me when I go around the world to different countries, whether it's Latin America or Europe or Asia, is that every language has a word which means being fluent, speaking fluent. And the idea is that language flows like a river, like water flows. And I suppose we can talk about fluency as being your general knowledge of a language. So if I say, Andrew is fluent in Hungarian, what I probably mean is he displays generally a good knowledge of it. I think of him as something better than a beginner. But it can also mean Andrew is fluent in Hungarian, that Andrew speaks it with this smoothness in a way that is flowing, I'm sure. Language teaching, since the 1980s, we have made a distinction between fluency and accuracy. And this comes from the work of the late Christopher Brumfitt, who wrote this initially in 1984. And we like to think that we do two things with our students. Sometimes we focus on accurate English, and then other times, and we see this as being something a little bit different, other times we say, well, accuracy is not terribly important. What I want you to do is just speak, and speak fluently. So in some sense, we are separating the two things. And you've seen that distinction. You've heard it many, many times. Fluency versus accuracy. We are separating them out. We are saying, when you are being fluent, it doesn't matter if you make some mistakes. It doesn't matter if your grammar is not very accurate. It doesn't matter if you don't have 59. And Fillmore said there were 5 dimensions, 5 aspects of being fluent. We could probably guess what some of them are, but let's not have a guessing game. Let's see what Fillmore said. First of all, the ability to talk at length, at speed, and with few pauses. So that's what I'm going to do now. From now, I'm going to talk at length, at speed, without any pauses. I'm going to talk like this for an hour, and you're all going to think it's a wonderful lecture we can deliver at speed. Well, clearly then, speed is a very relative thing. It would be a bad thing. Few pauses, again, this depends on the kind of talk that you are engaged in. Certainly in conversation, we don't like too many pauses. It sounds strange in an ordinary, friendly conversation. The goal is not to make our students speak fast. The goal is to help them to understand when it is important to be able to speak a little faster. When I started teaching, tape recorders were the size of a refrigerator, and we had to carry them from class to class like this. And, of course, linguists were very excited about these new machines, tape recorders. They said, now we can study the spoken language. We can record people speaking. We haven't been able to do this before. We don't know how Shakespeare spoke. We don't know how Cervantes spoke. Now we can record people. And they recorded people. The third one is have appropriate things to say in a wide range of contexts. Now this is a very interesting one because the demand here is that if you want to be heard and perceived as fluent, you actually need to be interesting. It's not enough just... My best friends and colleagues is a man called Ronald Carter, who I write books with, and he's a football fanatic. And he's always talking about football. But I have developed some strategies for making him think that I know a lot about football, but I don't know anything. Because I like him, and I like to have conversations with him. And I say, how's your team doing, Ron? And he says, oh, we just reached the quarterfinals. We had a great match last week against Fulham, and then in the second half we scored this wonderful goal. And I say, oh, who scored the goal? And then he tells me, and it's all going in there and out of there. But what I can do is I can engage in conversation with him about football because I have a few simple strategies for asking questions. And above all, I have ways of reacting which fool him, which deceive him into thinking that I'm interested. I say, oh really? That's great. Oh no. Now you know what a lot of these chunks are. Aldo, when he was demonstrating touchstone to you, he mentioned the chunk, I mean. I mean. And if we just take that chunk for a moment, I mean, and look at it, we can say certain things about it. Number one, it's not pronounced I mean, it's pronounced I mean. I mean, it's like the famous general who was president of, was it Nigeria or somewhere in the 1970s? So, I mean. That's the way you say it. Number two, you have to say it rather rapidly, quickly, in one go. I mean. No, that's too slow. Faster. Faster. That's better. That's better. So you have to say it rapidly. And number three, you can't break it up. You can't say, I mean. I mean, you can say that, but then it's not a chunk. You have destroyed its chunkiness. You've made something that it wasn't before. How many is that? That's 2 points or 3 points? I can't. Anyway, let's say number three, the next point about it is that it has a very precise set of functions in the language, pragmatic functions, ways in which it's used. For example, one of the most common ways in which I mean is used is to connect two questions. 5 words. One of my problems, I learned Spanish, you know, at university. I studied Spanish. It was my academic subject. I studied it at a very prestigious university. I'm not going to say what that university was called, but I don't mention the name of it. And we learned a lot of Spanish vocabulary. The windscreen, the windshield of the plane shattered and we had to go back. Now, if I don't know the word parabrisas, I don't just sit there silent. Y se rompió. And she says, no, of course not. So the responsibility for creating the flow, the responsibility for not having silence, is the responsibility of everybody in the conversation. It's not a single person's responsibility. Creating the flow is everybody's responsibility. It is the responsibility of all the speakers. Let's forget the word fluency. Let's instead talk about confluence, like two rivers when they come together. Last year I was in the Amazon in Brazil, and I went to the river in Manaus, the Rio Negro and the Rio Solimões, and they come together and they flow together. And you can't say really which is one river or which is the other, but there are two rivers. Good language teaching materials encourage response and encourage cooperation in creating fluency. If you can respond, you will be fluent. Thank you very much indeed.